Lorenzo Casella is an explorer from a wealthy family, but he chose to live an adventurous life and seek out the mysteries that no one dared to touch. His family are scientists, but they only care about theories that can be verified and proven through experiments. Lorenzo, on the other hand, is drawn to the mysterious, the stories that have yet to be explained. That is why he left everything behind to pursue his dream of becoming an explorer, searching for truths beyond human understanding. Lorenzo has a tall, sharp-featured appearance with cold blue eyes as if he can see through everything around him. He always carries a calm demeanor, sometimes cold, which helps him stay composed in tense situations. His skin is tanned from long journeys under the sun. His hair is short, black, always neatly combed, though some strands are starting to turn silver, a sign of someone who has endured many hardships. He typically wears athletic clothes, durable hiking boots, and always carries a large backpack containing the necessary tools for his expeditions. Lorenzo's personality is also not easy to analyze. He is decisive, full of confidence, but sometimes a bit stubborn and impatient. He has an intense curiosity for things yet to be discovered, which sometimes overrides his rational thinking, leading to risky decisions. However, he has a strong heart and is willing to sacrifice himself to uncover the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. He doesn't believe in ghost stories or the supernatural until he has to face them. This expedition started like an ordinary trip. Lorenzo received an invitation from an archaeological research team to a small village in northern Europe. The locals here had passed down stories of an ancient temple deep in the forest where there is a mysterious door. This door, according to legend, is said to seal a force that no one dares to touch, or that is Lucifer, the infamous devil in mythology. But Lorenzo does not believe in such stories. He considers them just fanciful legends, a part of the local folklore that the people here use to scare children. However, when he received information from an archaeological team about strange signs around the temple, he felt a strong urge to go there and explore. Perhaps this would be the journey that changes his life. Lorenzo arrived at the village on an autumn afternoon, where the gloomy sky and cold drizzle covered the entire land. The village seemed forgotten by time, with old houses and narrow, deserted streets. The locals here were not very welcoming, and they kept their distance when he mentioned the temple. They even advised him not to go into the forest because that door was not a place for humans. "I'm not afraid of your stories," Lorenzo smiled, but deep inside an unusually cold feeling began to rise. Guiding him was a villager named Eric, an older man with deep-set eyes, who always looked at Lorenzo as if he was doing something dangerous. "Be wary of what you will see," Eric said, his voice as though warning of something. "That door is not just an object. It is a curse." Lorenzo didn't pay much attention to the warning, and following Eric's lead, he entered the forest. The narrow path leading to the ancient temple became harder to navigate, with dry branches crackling beneath his feet. Just as the villagers had said, the temple was completely isolated, located in the middle of a secluded valley with no signs of life around. When they reached the temple, Lorenzo sensed a distinct difference. Everything around him felt weighed down by a dense atmosphere, as if this place contained something supernatural that couldn't be explained. The ancient stone walls were covered with green moss, and right in front was a massive stone door where ancient symbols were deeply carved. Lorenzo's eyes lit up when he saw the door. "This is it," he whispered. There was no key or any sign indicating the door could be opened, but with his curiosity and passion for discovery, Lorenzo decided to continue trying. He searched every corner of the temple, and after a long while he discovered a hidden mechanical system beneath the stone floor. After a few maneuvers, the door slowly opened, and a gust of cold air, like from hell, blew harshly into his face. Lorenzo stepped through the stone door, without a hint of doubt about what awaited him ahead. He felt as though he was stepping into a space beyond the reach of time and space. The air in the temple was heavy, and a cold feeling enveloped him, as if an invisible force was watching every step he took. Inside the temple, there was nothing but darkness. The old stone walls, the decayed wooden planks, and the patches of green moss covering the ground made the space eerie and full of gloom. Lorenzo was not afraid. He had been to places stranger than this, but the uncomfortable sensation in the air made him shiver. He ventured deeper, the light from his only flashlight barely illuminating a short distance ahead. The further he went, the more the ancient symbols carved on the walls became clearer, and they formed strange images, like scenes of destruction and darkness. Walking through a long corridor, Lorenzo reached a large room. In the center of the room was a large stone table, with deep cracks marking the passage of time. On the table, a small wooden box was carved with strange patterns. These signs made the mystery of the temple feel even heavier. Unable to resist his curiosity, he approached the box. Lorenzo slowly opened the box. Inside was an ancient book, its cover made of a material he had never seen before. The book seemed to emit a strong attraction, making him unable to take his eyes off it. The pages of the book were written in a language he could not understand, but the images and symbols seemed to connect, telling a story he had never heard before. He turned each page, and suddenly a cold wind blew strongly from behind. Lorenzo turned around, only to see impenetrable darkness, but there was a feeling as if someone was standing behind him, watching him silently. He shuddered, but still couldn't tear his eyes away from the book. In an instant, the symbols in the book began to fade, as if transmitting a message directly into his mind. "Whoever dares to open this door will receive the curse, and the light will fade into the darkness." Lorenzo jumped, feeling as though a voice whispered in his mind. He hurriedly closed the book, but at that moment, the room suddenly changed. The light from his flashlight flickered, as if it were about to go out. The darkness seemed to grow thicker, filling the space, and a soft laugh echoed from somewhere in the darkness. Lorenzo felt his heart pounding. He looked around, but saw nothing. Everything became eerily silent. He could even feel the movement of the air, an invisible presence clinging to him. He quickly packed his belongings, carefully placing the book into his backpack. However, when he turned back, the door he had opened earlier had disappeared. The room became completely sealed. There was no way out. Outside, the sky darkened, and the cold wind suddenly became fierce. Lorenzo began to feel like he was trapped in a nightmare that he could not wake up from. Everything around him became blurry, and the strange laugh seemed to echo somewhere, lingering in the dark space. But the scariest thing was the feeling that someone was waiting for him from the darkness ahead. Lorenzo stood still, sensing the change in the space. Each of his breaths echoed in the silent space, as if being swallowed by the vast darkness. The door had disappeared, but it felt as though there was a presence watching his every step, making him uneasy. He walked around the room, searching for a way out. Everything was hopeless. The cold stone walls, no window, and no signs of any exit. Suddenly a strange sound came from behind, a sound like wood being scratched, followed by a gust of icy air. Lorenzo turned around, the light from his flashlight flickering even more. The cracks in the walls began to widen, and within them, a blurry image began to emerge. It was a shadow of a demon, a grotesque and terrifying shape. This shadow was not just a vague silhouette, but a strange creature with dark, wrinkled skin like decayed bark, its eyes glowing like flames. Its fiery red eyes shone with malice and greed. Its body seemed stretched, with grotesque details appearing with every movement, long, sharp claws like spikes, deeply embedded into the air. Its skin was wrinkled and torn, as if the layers of skin were being stretched, revealing black veins like slippery ropes, tangled throughout its body. A soft laugh echoed from the shadow of the demon, cold and full of malice, as if it were enjoying the fear spreading within Lorenzo. Each of its steps left a cold burn on the ground, as if it were walking on ice, causing the space around him to feel frozen. Lorenzo's heart pounded, and he felt the supernatural power surrounding him. An invisible force pulled him into the darkness, each hair on his body standing on end. He couldn't move. His legs seemed nailed to the ground. His breath became labored, and the air in the room seemed to grow thicker, heavy, to the point where he felt like he couldn't breathe. The shadow of the demon drew closer, and with each step it took, the energy in the space seemed to drain away. Every movement of the shadow caused the light from Lorenzo's flashlight to grow weaker and flicker, as if it could not resist the darkness enveloping him. At this point, the shadow of the demon was no longer just a vague shape, but a grotesque creature with scars on its body, deep, festering wounds that seemed to have existed for a long time, and cracks in the space around it made it all the more terrifying. "You cannot escape," the voice echoed, this time not through the space, but seemingly directly in Lorenzo's mind. The voice was heavy, carrying an indescribable, eerie sensation. It was not just a voice, but a compulsion, a temptation, as if the demon's shadow was trying to seize his mind. Lorenzo swallowed hard, his palms wet with sweat. He could feel the cold from the shadow of the demon spreading through his body. His fingers began to tremble, but he couldn't stop looking at the demon's shadow. Its glowing red eyes flared, and from its mouth a cold mist, like poisonous gas, escaped, followed by a soft laugh. "The darkness will swallow you," the demon whispered. Lorenzo could not move, as if an invisible rope was tightening around him. But then, in that moment of panic, an idea flashed in his mind. If he couldn't escape, he would have to face it. He took a deep breath, but his body still could not move. The shadow of the demon came closer and closer, and it felt like something was attacking his mind, almost making him want to collapse. Suddenly a loud noise came from behind. The door he had passed through earlier suddenly reappeared, but it was no longer a normal door. It emitted a dark light, like a rift between two worlds. A door that was no longer a way out, but a passage into a space with no return. Lorenzo turned to look, but this door did not seem like salvation. Instead, the shadow of the demon moved closer, no longer hesitating, but now advancing like a wild beast, ready to devour its victim. Lorenzo had no other choice. The invisible ropes tightened around his mind, preventing him from being still. The shadow of the demon was getting closer. Each step it took was crushing, a curse being fulfilled. The coldness surrounded him, almost paralyzing him, but deep within the despair, an unexpected thought flashed in his mind. The cross. He couldn't remember when he had picked it up, but in his hand now the wooden cross glowed with a faint light, as if it were resisting the darkness. He clenched the cross tightly, feeling the invisible strength from it, as if a mysterious source of energy was slowly resurrecting in his body. Lorenzo poured holy water into a small vial and poured it over the cross. The holy water bubbled up as if it were being heated from within, and the steam emitted a foul smell, as if it were destroying all evil in this world. The shadow of the demon paused for a moment, its red eyes gleaming with surprise, but then it scoffed, as if mocking the weakness of humanity. "You think these useless objects can stand against me?" The shadow of the demon laughed, its voice emanating from all around. as if thousands of monsters were whispering in his head at once. "Your light can never defeat my eternal darkness." Lorenzo did not respond. He closed his eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and gripped the cross tightly. Suddenly, he knelt and began to recite a prayer he had been taught since childhood, a prayer of forgiveness and protection. Immediately, a blinding beam of light erupted from the cross, piercing through the dark space. The light gradually grew stronger, as if it were pushing the darkness back. The demon's shadow could not remain still. Its body began to shrink as though the light from the cross was causing it pain, its skin peeling away, revealing dark scars and slimy cracks. "Damn it!" the demon howled, no longer smug, but filled with intense rage. Its body contorted, its long arms bending as if they were reaching out to claw through the air. "You will pay dearly for this foolishness." Suddenly, the demon lunged at Lorenzo, its red eyes burning like two flames, scorching the space. But Lorenzo was ready. He swung the cross at it. A powerful beam of light, like a divine strike, shot out from the cross, striking the demon's shadow. The force of the blow made the demon stagger back a step, but it was not completely destroyed. On the contrary, it roared, seemingly even more enraged. "You are a long way from defeating me," the demon said, and from its mouth a thick, black mist poured out, like a black wind sweeping along. The air grew heavy, and for a moment, Lorenzo felt as if he was being pushed back. His entire body seemed paralyzed, but he did not let go of the cross. He turned back, poured more holy water over the cross, and this time not just a little, but an entire wave of water, spreading out like a storm. Each drop of holy water shot out, hitting the demon's shadow and making it cry out in pain. But the demon would not give up. It charged forward, its arms stretching like spectral limbs, attempting to grab Lorenzo. Suddenly, a burst of light from the cross flared up intensely. This time, not only from the cross but from the entire space. The cracks in the space widened, and the bright white light blazed like a star exploding. The demon howled in pain, its body no longer able to stand firm, with patches of blackened, decaying skin, and its fingers twisted into long, biled thorns. "No, no way!" the demon screamed, the eerie sounds echoing throughout the space like a violent storm. Lorenzo no longer hesitated. He swung the cross again, this time without fear. He could feel the power of the light coursing through his body, a mighty force he had never imagined. The light from the cross not only repelled the demon's shadow, but tore the darkness apart, causing it to disintegrate like dust. But just when the demon's shadow was almost completely destroyed, a strong wind suddenly swept through, and a blurry figure reappeared. The demon, though under attack, was still not entirely eradicated. It roared, its voice booming like an explosion. "You won't escape me so easily." Lorenzo knew nothing more. The light was gradually growing stronger, but the demon's darkness was still not fully defeated. This battle, perhaps, had only just begun. Lorenzo felt the power from the cross slowly depleting. The demon's shadow, though severely wounded by the light, was not completely destroyed. However, he knew this was his last chance. He pulled the silver sword from his backpack, its light gleaming like a lightning bolt in the darkness. This was the sword he had kept for many years, not to fight ordinary evil, but to confront ancient demons, like the shadow now facing him. With unwavering determination, Lorenzo attached the sword to the bottom of the cross, creating a weapon combining light and destructive power. The silver blade gleamed brightly, reflecting a divine strength, and he felt an invisible force rising within him. This was the decisive blow, the final strike to destroy the demon's shadow. With a strong swing of his hand, he aimed at the staggering shadow, its fingers beginning to curl as if preparing to resist. But before he could strike, a cold, biting wind suddenly blew through, and a long, grotesque hand reached out from the darkness. This hand was not from the demon's shadow, but a massive, pitch-black hand, long and gnarled like the claws of a monster. Its skin was dark grey, as if burned from the inside out, and the cracks in its skin revealed streams of thick, black blood, flowing like burning resin. Its fingers were long like swords, curved, sharp as thorns. That hand reached out from the dark space, blocking Lorenzo's sword just before it could reach the demon's shadow. Lorenzo stood frozen, feeling as if he were facing a real monster. No longer the demon's shadow, but a far superior creature, an entity he had never imagined. The hand, even though it had touched the silver sword, was unharmed. On the contrary, it seemed to absorb all the light, causing the sword and the cross to fade, as if their power was being drained, little by little. Lorenzo stepped back, but that hand would not relent. It seized the sword, preventing him from pulling it out. He felt an immense force from that hand, as if it were trying to make him kneel. Do you think the light and power of the cross can defeat everything? A cold, arrogant voice echoed from the darkness, like a fire burning through his mind. How naive! Lorenzo looked into the darkness. The hand had emerged. A blurry shape gradually appeared, and it was a large creature, with skin as black as charcoal, a black cloak wrapped around its body, and its red eyes stared directly at Lorenzo, like flames burning everything. No longer a demon's shadow, but a creature far more terrifying and dreadful, one of Satan's children. I am Abaddon, the creature said, its voice full of power, resonating throughout the space. The son of Satan, ruler of darkness, and you, Lorenzo, will be the first gift I bring to my father. Lorenzo swallowed, his body trembling before Abaddon's presence. This was a true demon, a creature from hell, something he had never imagined he would face. Abaddon's hand was not only powerful, but also carried an absolute dark force, as if it could tear everything apart. You cannot defeat me, Abaddon continued, a cruel smile forming. Even with the silver sword and the cross, they are just weak tools in your hands. You do not know that hell has been waiting for you for a long time. Lorenzo felt his entire body being squeezed by an enormous steel vice. Though he still held the cross and the silver sword, all their power seemed to be gradually fading before Abaddon's presence. He couldn't allow himself to surrender. He knew he wouldn't last long if he remained still. With one last act of determination, Lorenzo gritted his teeth, gripping the sword and the cross tightly. He made a desperate swing towards Abaddon, but Abaddon raised his hand, and from it, a dark power seemed to consume all the light in the room, making the space around him heavy and grim. It is too late, Abaddon sneered. We are not ones you can defeat. Abaddon stepped out of the darkness, his long black wings like a shroud covering the entire space. His presence made everything around Lorenzo seem to be swallowed into the void. Lorenzo felt an oppressive force invade every cell of his body. Abaddon's hand still gripped the silver sword in his hand, as if it were draining all his strength into his massive body. Every time he tried to yank it away, the demon's long, grotesque hand held it tight, like an unbreakable steel clamp. Abaddon laughed loudly, his voice echoing throughout the space. His red, hellish eyes emitted a blinding light, turning everything around him into a sea of darkness, full of grotesque distortions. Do you think you can defeat me? Abaddon said, his voice deep and cold. Your silver sword, your cross, they are nothing but toys to me. I'll watch as I end you. With a violent jerk, Abaddon pulled the sword from Lorenzo's hand. Blood spurted from his hand like a stream as his fingers were torn apart, blood splattering onto the ground, staining the surrounding earth. Lorenzo collapsed, but he struggled to rise. His breath was heavy, but he dared not allow himself to fall. The demon Abaddon did not give Lorenzo a moment's rest. He charged forward, his giant, bat-like black wings spread wide, tearing through the space around him like a whirlwind. He swung his left hand, his long, sharp claws like blades, slashing through the air, leaving behind bright red streaks. Lorenzo had no time to dodge and was struck forcefully in the chest, causing him to stumble and fall to the ground. The wound was deep, and blood poured out like a river. He could taste the cold, metallic tang of blood in his mouth. Abaddon closed in, his hellish red eyes staring down at Lorenzo with contempt. He placed a hand on his head, as if intending to crush his soul immediately. "Do you truly think you can defeat me, one who carries the blood of Satan?" Abaddon whispered, his voice like a curse. Lorenzo stared into the red eyes of the demon, struggling to mutter a prayer. His entire body was in pain, but in his heart, his faith never wavered. With a quick motion, Lorenzo pulled a small, holy talisman from his pocket and tossed it into the air. Immediately, a beam of light radiated from the talisman, illuminating the space around him. The demon Abaddon recoiled a step, crying out in pain from the light. "What?" he roared, jumping back. But before he could retreat far, Lorenzo stood up. In his hands, the silver sword and the cross shone like a lightning bolt piercing the darkness. He charged forward at an unimaginable speed, thrusting the sword deep into Abaddon's chest. Black blood, as thick as ink, poured out of Abaddon's chest, almost suffocating Lorenzo with its foul stench. But unlike ordinary creatures, this wound did not weaken Abaddon. He laughed, a terrifying sound that made everything in the room seem to crack. "Ha ha 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 ha! You think a silver sword can kill me?" Abaddon hissed, then raised his hand and swung it hard, striking Lorenzo's face. The blow sent him flying through the air, crashing hard into the wall. Blood poured from his mouth, his vision blurred. He had no strength left to stand. However, he still struggled to hold on to the cross in his hand, refusing to let it fall. Abaddon walked closer. Step by step, he trod over the pools of Lorenzo's blood, laughing with disdain. "Do you think you can defeat me? Weakling, I will tear your soul apart and send it to hell." But in the moment that Abaddon was about to deliver the final blow, a loud roar rang out, as if a storm had risen from hell. Suddenly, from the darkness, another figure appeared, a gigantic shadow demon, a different dark entity. Not Abaddon. It seemed to want to stop Abaddon. Abaddon turned, his voice full of challenge. "What do you want?" But before he could react, the shadow demon attacked, its sharp claws reaching out and tearing through everything in its path. The two demonic entities clashed violently, locked in a blood-soaked battle. Lorenzo, though exhausted and barely able to stand, realized that this was his only chance to escape the darkness. He gritted his teeth, stood up, and once again swung the silver sword, determined to seize his freedom, even if it cost him his life. Lorenzo stood there, his body bleeding, his arm trembling as he held the silver sword, but its light was slowly fading. Abaddon stood before him, an expression of utter arrogance on his face. Abaddon's red, fiery eyes stared directly at Lorenzo, showing no mercy. "You can continue to resist," Abaddon said, his voice filled with contempt. "But in the end, you are just prey in my game. You cannot escape this fate." Lorenzo struggled to breathe, the wounds from Abaddon's blows still tormenting him. He felt the weakness of his body as cold blood flowed from his wounds, making his vision blur. But the fighting spirit within him never faded. Lorenzo did not want to die, not now, not when he could still do something to stop this evil. With a weak swing of his sword, Lorenzo charged forward, but he couldn't touch Abaddon. The demon easily avoided his attack and reached out, as if he were playing with his prey. "You cannot defeat me, Lorenzo," Abaddon said, his voice like a warning, full of arrogance. "Your weapons are nothing but a joke in my eyes." Just as Lorenzo was about to strike again, Abaddon quickly reached out, seized the sword, threw it away like a useless object. He approached Lorenzo, his hand full of sharp claws reaching out like dark sticks, ready to tear apart anything that dared to resist. A sharp, excruciating pain surged when Abaddon squeezed Lorenzo's calf. It felt as though every bone in his leg was being crushed under an unimaginable force. Lorenzo screamed in agony, but had no time to react. Abaddon merely twisted his hand, and Lorenzo's left leg was torn from his body, blood splattering everywhere, spraying across the space. Lorenzo collapsed, feeling as though his entire body was being torn apart. He saw his leg, blood pouring from the wound like a stream, but he could do nothing to stop it. The pain was so intense he couldn't breathe, couldn't say a word. Abaddon stood over him, his face filled with satisfaction. "And now you will know the helplessness of mankind," he said, his gaze like a raging inferno. "You cannot stop death. You cannot stop me. You will die here, Lorenzo." Lorenzo's vision blurred. He could only feel the ultimate pain in his body. Blood continued to pour from the wound, weakening him with each passing second. His breath became rapid and labored, but he refused to give up. "No, I can't die here," Lorenzo whispered. Despite the pain, he held the cross, trying to push it toward Abaddon. The light from the cross still emanated a little, weak but determined. Abaddon merely looked at it, as if it were a useless object. He lifted his foot, stomped on the cross, shattering it, and the faint light immediately faded. "You cannot use these to fight me," Abaddon said, his voice like a cold, mocking laugh. "I am the son of Satan, the supreme ruler of hell." Lorenzo no longer had the strength to resist. He had lost too much blood and had no energy left. But in his mind, one thought remained clear. He could not let hell win. He still had one final weapon, the only thing that could save him, and perhaps the only way to stop Abaddon. Blood flowed from his wound like a stream of bright red, almost making Lorenzo lose consciousness. In this moment of despair, he thought of Lord Jesus, the one he had once revered and prayed to. A final spark of hope flickered within him. Lorenzo knew he could not face Abaddon with human strength. For one who carried the blood of Satan, material weapons and earthly power were not enough to defeat him. But he still had one last weapon, a divine power that could help him fight, and that was prayer. In his moment of exhaustion, Lorenzo closed his eyes, focusing all his remaining strength, call upon the name of the Lord. His body felt nearly paralyzed, but he still managed to place his hand over his chest, where the broken cross now only had a small piece left. He murmured the prayer his mother had taught him from childhood, whispered like the wind. But within his heart burned an intense flame that could not be extinguished. "Lord Jesus, I call upon you. Please send one of your angels. Please save me from this darkness. Please let me fight once more so that I can bring light to this world." Lorenzo could feel a cold wind blowing through his body. A divine light, gentle and warm, slowly spread through the space. A miracle had occurred. A bright figure, like an angel, began to appear from the darkness. A tall and majestic figure began to emerge from the light. It was Michael, the warrior angel, the son of Jesus Christ. Michael was unlike any angel Lorenzo had ever heard of. He was tall, with a muscular and robust body, like a warrior who knew nothing of fatigue. Despite being an angel, his appearance was not gentle. It radiated a strength that overshadowed every weakness of mankind. Michael's armor, shining and intricate, covered his body from neck to toe. It was not made of ordinary metal, but a material of light, an invisible substance that radiated a brilliant halo. The details of the armor depicted images of angels and nature, enhancing his beauty and majesty. Michael's wings, an inseparable part of his form, spread wide, each feather glittering with pure light. They were long and strong, extending behind him, forming a magnificent and awe-inspiring image, as though he could fly through any space, defying darkness and time. The weapon in Michael's hand was the Sword of Light. It was no ordinary sword. It was so bright that it could pierce through darkness. The blade was long and sharp, forged from the pure light of heaven, unlike any material from the mortal world. The hilt was a band of silver light, connected to a radiant gem at the end. Every time Michael swung the sword, the light seemed to tear through the air, illuminating every corner of hell, forcing all darkness to retreat. With every step, Michael's presence grew stronger, and nothing could hinder him. His eyes, radiating divine light, locked onto Abaddon with an unyielding sternness. The light in Michael's eyes burned away all evil, erasing every trace of wickedness in this world. Michael walked toward Lorenzo, his wings gently stirring the air. Each flap illuminated a section of the sky, spreading peace and power. As he approached Lorenzo, the atmosphere around them seemed to change completely. The darkness and pain were banished, replaced by a feeling of tranquility and hope. Michael looked at Lorenzo, his eyes gentle, yet full of determination. "You fought bravely, Lorenzo," Michael said, his voice strong but filled with comfort. "Now, you have completed your mission." With a powerful gesture, Michael raised his sword and prepared to strike at Abaddon. No unnecessary words were spoken, only the sound of wind as he charged toward the demon. The light from the sword blazed, slicing through the air like lightning. Abaddon, even though he was the most powerful and dangerous demon, had to retreat, unable to counter the divine power. "You've done too many evil deeds, Abaddon," Michael said, his gaze full of punishment. "Now I will finish you." The light from Michael's sword not only illuminated the space, but also emitted an intense energy that caused the air to expand and shatter. The wounds on Lorenzo's body, though not fully healed, felt soothed by the power of the divine light. He could sense a newfound strength, a miraculous source of energy, filled with hope and courage. But Abaddon, though forced to retreat, was not an easy demon to erase. Everything around them disappeared in a moment of silence, but a malicious laugh echoed through the space, shattering all hope. "Did you really think your light could dispel this darkness?" Abaddon chuckled softly, his voice full of mockery and challenge. Michael glared at him, his eyes flashing with anger. "You don't understand the power of God." Abaddon stood up, his body vaguely covered in darkness, the wounds from Michael's sword slowly disappearing, as though his darkness consumed all injury and pain. He reached out with his massive hand, grasping the air as if seizing the very darkness surrounding him. A wave of darkness surged, instantly transforming the space into a desolate wasteland, filled with chilling winds and the screams of ghosts. Abaddon, in his terrifying dark form, had become stronger, than ever. Michael did not back down. His sword blazed like a pillar of sacred fire, the light piercing the darkness. He stepped toward Abaddon, determined to deliver a fatal blow. Lorenzo, though unable to fight as before, clearly understood his role in this moment. He could not simply stand by, though his body was covered in wounds. He stood firm with resilience. He turned to Michael, his gaze full of determination. "Together," he said, his voice firm, "we will end him." Michael looked at Lorenzo, his gaze showing both approval and seriousness. "You cannot stand still. If you want to help, follow my lead." Lorenzo did not hesitate. He grabbed a piece of ancient stone that he had previously used to open the door. He knew that while this stone was not a divine weapon, it had a latent power he could tap into. He prayed once more, and immediately a flicker of light shone from his palm. The ancient stone glowed, emitting a miraculous source of power that only those with strong faith could harness. In that moment, the two forces, light and darkness, clashed in an uncompromising battle. Abaddon bared his fangs and charged toward Michael with terrifying speed. His body transformed into a bizarre mass of black shadows, his limbs twisting like vicious vines. His arms swung up, claws, sharp as knives, sliced through the air. Michael reacted quickly, swinging his sword to block the blow, but the power of Abaddon forced him to step back. Meanwhile, Lorenzo, holding the ancient stone in his hand, concentrated all his strength and released a powerful beam of light, shooting it toward Abaddon. The beam struck his darkness, causing his form to scatter into fragments of black shadow, but immediately they reformed, stronger than before. Abaddon laughed loudly, his laughter echoing throughout the space, roaring with challenge. "Do you think you can defeat me?" Michael did not answer. He focused on his sword and once again attacked with unstoppable force. The blade of his sword lit up brilliantly, plunging directly into Abaddon's body, creating an intense explosion of light. The rays of light shattered, destroying the layers of darkness around him. But Abaddon was not dead. He was only violently shaken. The battle grew even fiercer as Abaddon used all the power of darkness. He not only attacked with his claw, but also unleashed waves of destructive dark air, twisting the space around them, making it impossible to breathe. Michael and Lorenzo continued to fight, despite their pain and exhaustion. They coordinated seamlessly, Michael swinging his sword, while Lorenzo used the ancient stone to create beams of light, weakening Abaddon's power. The battle reached its climax, and none of the three, Michael, Abaddon, or Lorenzo, paused. The entire space, not only torn apart by light and darkness, but also surrounded by the very souls around them, was caught in the chaos. The battle between Michael and Abaddon had never been so fierce. Though Michael's light and the power from Lorenzo's ancient stone had weakened the darkness, Abaddon was no mere demon to be subdued. With the boundless power of hell, he stood strong despite the severe wounds his body had suffered. Abaddon laughed loudly, his laughter roaring from deep within hell. "Your light cannot destroy me," he said, his voice booming, full of confidence. "You cannot win. You do not understand the power I possess." He raised his hand, and from the darkness, a terrifying weapon emerged, a pitch-black scepter emitting a chilling, eerie aura. The scepter was not only a weapon of defense, but also a tool of destruction that could erase everything that existed. The light in the air gradually faded as this black scepter appeared. "This is the weapon of hell," Abaddon roared. "This weapon can destroy not only souls but also light. Everything you believe to be powerful, now you will see." Abaddon swung the scepter toward the sky, and in the blink of an eye, dark rays shot out from the scepter like thousands of arrows. The surrounding demons, once only dark spots lingering in the space, were instantly annihilated in a series of deafening explosions. Each demon, each soul of the dead, was shattered into clouds of black smoke. Lorenzo, unable to react in time, was struck by a wave from the scepter. His body was crushed, leaving no shape other than scattered fragments of flesh, bright red blood splattering everywhere. He died instantly, with no strength left to continue fighting. Michael, though close by, could not avoid the impact of the devastating attack. The black scepter caused his body to stagger. His form struck so violently that his clothes were torn apart, and his right wing was brutally severed. Blood poured from his mouth, his body swaying, nearly collapsing, despite his severe injuries. Michael still did not surrender. He struggled to stand, looking toward Abaddon, his eyes filled with fury and determination. "You will not win," Michael whispered, his voice weak but still full of resilience. "Your doom is near." Abaddon merely smirked. Despite being gravely wounded, half of his body lost, he still did not feel weak. He knew that with just a little more time, he would regain his strength. Hell was where he was born and where he existed. There was nothing here that could weaken him. He began to draw the dark energy and blood from the cracks of hell, absorbing power from the depths of this dark world. The wounds on his body started to heal quickly, his flesh regenerating, and the broken bones slowly reconnecting. Hellfire and black blood from the dark earth flowed into his body, making him stronger than ever before. He looked at Michael, his eyes filled with contempt and challenge. "You are just weak creatures," he said. "You can fight, but you will never win." Michael was not afraid. Though his body was nearly collapsing, he still fought on. His arm gripped the sword tightly, the light from the sword flickering, weak, but still brilliant. He charged toward Abaddon once more, even though death could come instantly. Michael, though strong and resilient, could not face the destructive power of Abaddon for long. Every strike from Abaddon was powerful and brutal, leaving Michael severely wounded. The injuries gradually made it impossible for him to continue fighting. His right arm, once holding the glowing sword, was now only a mass of deep wounds, with fresh blood oozing from every drop. Michael tried to stay standing, but his body had grown too weak. He knew he no longer had the strength to face the demon Abaddon. Abaddon laughed mockingly, his eyes glowing red like hellfire. "You cannot fight against me, Michael," he whispered, his voice full of murderous intent. "Your weakness is clear proof that light cannot defeat darkness." He stepped closer to Michael, his massive hands reaching out and tightening around his neck. Michael gasped for breath, in pain, but still did not give up. He tried to look toward the light, hoping that some miracle would happen. But before him stood the cruelty and rage of Abaddon. "This is your end," Abaddon said with a cruel expression, and then he began to crush Michael's body in his hands. Pain surged through Michael, and in an instant his body was torn apart by Abaddon's power. He ripped through layer after layer of flesh, then devouring Michael's flesh like a starving beast. The fresh red meat was swallowed whole, while Michael's bones were crushed, and then forged into weapons for Abaddon. But Michael's soul, despite being gravely wounded, did not completely vanish. At that moment, a force from above descended. Jesus Christ, from the heights of the heavenly realm, had seen the sacrifice and bravery of Michael. He could not allow the soul of this brave warrior to be erased by darkness. a strange light blazed from heaven, piercing through space and time, then descended upon Michael. His soul, though wounded, was quickly saved by Jesus, pulling him out of the hell that was trying to consume him. Abaddon stood tall, his eyes burning with hatred. "You cannot win forever," he roared, but could do nothing as Michael's soul was rescued. Jesus looked at Michael's soul, and a surge of anger rose within him. A brave warrior, a man who had fought for the light, had sacrificed everything to stop the demon, only to be torn apart by Abaddon. This could not be allowed. Michael's soul was lifted by Jesus in his hands, the light emanating from his hands like a brilliant torch, soothing the wounds that Michael had endured. But in his heart, the anger continued to rise. Abaddon, such a powerful demon, killed one of his loyal warriors. He could not forgive that. Jesus looked down at hell, where Abaddon existed, a dark and dangerous world. He could feel the presence of the demon, the brutal existence of him, filling that dark space. Jesus, filled with wrath, decided to descend into hell, to directly confront Abaddon, to destroy him once and for all. But just as he prepared to act, a sound rang out, cold and threatening. It was a familiar voice, but full of enchantment and malice. "You cannot enter here, Jesus." The voice echoed from deep within hell, like a curse. "If you dare step into hell, you will pay with your very existence." Jesus paused, and his eyes gazed distantly toward the source of the sound. An unusual feeling overtook him, and he immediately recognized it was Lucifer, Prayer, the creator of darkness, watching him from the depths of hell. Michael's soul still hovered in his hands, but now he felt an incredibly terrifying threat. Lucifer was not easily defeated, and he had raised this battle to a new level, one where even Jesus had to be cautious. "You have no right to act as you wish," Lucifer continued, his voice resonating like echoes from an endless darkness. "If you try to cross this limit, not only will I resist, but all of hell will rise against you. This is a war you cannot win." Jesus stood still, feeling the threat in Lucifer's words. He knew that if he entered hell now, he would not only face Abaddon, but the entire force of Lucifer. A brutal war, with an outcome that could not be predicted. Lucifer's threat echoed through the space, and Jesus, filled with anger and pain, knew that he could not act hastily. This was not only about his personal victory or defeat, but also about considering the safety of the entire world. Finally, after a bloody and devastating battle, the confrontation between the forces of light and darkness gradually came to a close. A corner of hell now lay in ruins, with traces of the battle still lingering in the air. Flames continued to rise, reaching into the dark sky, but there was no life left. The ghosts around, once drifting in the gloomy space, had now disappeared, as if the battle had swept everything away. Abaddon stood amidst the destruction, his body soaked in blood and covered in wounds. He had won, and this victory was not only his own, but also a significant step forward in his power. His body, though severely injured, was now rapidly healing thanks to the dark energy of hell. He felt a powerful growth in every cell, his strength raised to a new level, mighty and terrifying. Each breath he took carried with it a frightening force, causing the space around him to seem to crack. Michael, who had sacrificed himself for the light, lay motionless on the ground. His body had been torn apart and completely destroyed in the hands of Abaddon, but his soul was not annihilated. Though his physical form was lost, his soul still existed. and that was the only thing Jesus could save. From heaven, Jesus looked down and felt Michael's sacrifice. He knew that this was not the end. With a powerful gesture, Jesus began to save Michael's soul. He started to restore the body of the brave warrior. Even though his body had been shattered and destroyed, the entire world seemed to pause, and a gentle beam of light from heaven shone down, bringing life to Michael. His body slowly began to reform from the debris, with every bone, flesh, and blood being reborn from the pure light of Jesus. As Michael's body was restored, he opened his eyes, feeling both pain and the new life within him. He stood up, looking toward Jesus, with eyes full of gratitude, but also filled with concern for the world, knowing that this battle was not truly over. Abaddon's power had now increased significantly, and that was a great danger to all. Jesus looked at Michael, then turned his gaze toward hell, where the darkness awaited. "This battle is not over," he said. "We will meet again, but today you have won part of this battle." The atmosphere in hell had calmed, and silence enveloped the space. But this quiet was only temporary. The mystery still remained, hidden in the deep shadows